I call the meeting to order. This is the informational meeting of the Washington Central Unified Union School District for the on February 10th for the closure of both Calais and Doty. We want to welcome you here. We want to begin by acknowledging that this is a hard conversation. And as we had talked before, schools are the hearts of our communities, and they hold our memories, our relationships, and our sense of belonging. And change can feel personal, emotional, and unsettling. And we honor that. As we move forward here today, we're hoping to answer any questions that you continue to have as regard of information so that you can have an informed vote. We are working really hard to bring both our hearts and our brains to this work, and we recognize that this is, we're asking you to make a choice, and it doesn't feel good. We have received both positive and negative, and we're trying our best to not divide our community, but to bring us together as one community on behalf of all of our kids. So today we have the flexibility of now having time constraint for your questions. So we're going to start with a very brief presentation that Stephen is going to make, and then we're going to move immediately to questions. We have blocked an hour and a half, and we'll see how we're doing. I just ask you all to please be kind and thoughtful in your messages, and use I not try to speak for others, and just we're here as your public servants. We are trying to do our best to educate all of our kids in our district and support public education for everybody. So just a reminder, there's no time limit. But be thoughtful with one another so that everybody has a chance to ask a question. We have a few people online too. So we welcome all of your questions that you have for us. And with that, I'm going to give it to Stephen, and thank also our board members in the community and ORCA for being here. And I see we have Jav here with us too. Go ahead, Stephen.
Okay, thank you, everybody. If online, can you just give me a thumbs up if you're hearing this clearly? I just would love to know that we're broadcasting well for you. Oh, Lila, I'm going to take that as a thumbs up. Thank you. All right. And so I just appreciate everybody being here this afternoon on this cold, snowy day. A little more snow than I expected. I don't know what you guys had heard, but ended up having to run the snowblower. So I've got a short little presentation for us here. Give me one moment, please. It just gives us a little bit of information that has been shared previously as well. All right. Here we go. All right. And that should pop up pretty quick. Yes. Right, so our configuration work began several years ago after our district had gone through a process of revising our strategic plan, and that strategic plan began with work with our community, our schools, our kids, our staffs, making sure what are the core values and beliefs that we have as a district. And so, the first part of our work for our strategic plan was these core beliefs of humanity, justice, community, and belonging, rigorous curriculum and instruction, well-being, transparent and responsible leadership, and community engagement and relationships. Once we had defined those, we went and developed three major goals for our strategic plan to build and nurture a culture of well-being and inclusivity, challenge, empower, and engage each student through evidence-based instructional strategies and curriculum, and foster and commit to responsible leadership that engages the community and communicates transparently. After that work, we moved into a configuration committee created by the board. But that wasn't the beginning of the work that we've had. If you look on our website, we've actually got, under configuration, we show the 2010 governance studies that were done in our district between a couple of the schools. 2014 was the first or most I don't know that it was the first, but it was a district-wide, back when we were a supervisory union, it was a efficiency study to see where could we as a district or as a supervisory union create some more efficiencies within our programming and our structures. And then in 23-24 school year, after our strategic plan work, that's when the board created the configuration committee that came to a board vote not to reconfigure last year and to reconstitute the configuration committee with additional members from the community. That group met and eventually recommended the model that we are currently looking at with the 3 elementary schools and a 612 U32 in the future to the board. The board approved that, and that kind of brings us to where we are right now, which is we are looking to have a vote in the towns for closure of Callis and for Doty. One of the questions that's come up repeatedly in this process is what other options were considered. So in the first configuration study back in April 24, there were several that were brought forward. So do we maintain our current configuration? Do we do the 3 pre-K-5 elementary schools and grade 6-12? Do we look at 2 elementary schools with an early learning center? And do we look at 1 pre-K-5 elementary school, or what if we looked at 4? One of the things that we learned quickly is the top 2 were the 3 pre-K-5 elementary schools and the 2 elementary schools. They met most of our criteria at the time. The 2 elementary school with an early learning center, what that proved most difficult to do was transportation for our youngest kids. Because our elementary schools kind of sit on the outside of the circle as opposed to centrally located to the whole district, it was difficult to have a location in which transportation wasn't a real mountain to climb for us on that one. We also considered other options in the latest configuration committee, which was certainly the current configuration or the 3 pre-K-5 models. That was one of the models that was predominant in the first group. We also looked at, could we create pre-K-3 schools and grade 4-6 schools? So could we do something like pre-K through 3 at Callis and 4 through 6 at East Montpelier, or some combination of that throughout the district? That actually proves to be a very difficult configuration for us for transportation. We would be having to transport families from, so they could have 3 kids at one location, or in their family that went to 3 different locations, which means you have to have 3 buses that go to that one household. So we found that to be very difficult. There are other school systems who had this configuration that I talked to when we were looking at it. As long as the schools were pretty close together, then this could possibly work, but almost all of them ran into the same transportation issue and found it to be very daunting. And so that one was discounted as part of our work as well. What's really driven a lot of this work is enrollment. It's the major driver of the work that we're having to do. We've seen a 14% decline in enrollment over the last 10 years, and we'll see another predicted 14 to 16% enrollment decline over the next 10. And so when we look at any single factor that drives this the most, that is it. The declining enrollment is that. And so you can kind of have a picture here of what it looks like. If you look there to the far right and the bottom, our projected enrollment for kindergarten through 12th grade in fiscal year 32, which is a ways out, is just under 1,100 students for the entire district. And so those are some pretty hard numbers for us to service well in the current configuration. And then the other big question was what were the criteria? Like, what did we use to start making our decision? And we started with the idea that programming must drive our structure. What do we want for our kids to have? What do we want that to look like? And so when we started to look at it, where were our inconsistencies in our programming, our staffing, our resources, and our facility utilization? And how could we make those things more similar across the district, deeper in some cases, so additional staffing. An area where this comes up very commonly was the school counselors, school nursing, and librarian. How could we have full-time positions in our schools? Because that is something that our communities have been asking for throughout the last several years, probably the last 5 to 6 years since COVID. That has been a high desire of our communities. We also looked at our school programs, making sure what can we do with our music programs, what does transportation look like, could we do something with our pre-K programs that was different than what we were currently doing. So things like music, we could keep band and chorus in the configuration that we've proposed. It makes it very difficult otherwise because we don't have enough students to have full band or full chorus programs in some of our smaller schools. Transportation modeling for us, this was an area where we could see that, that because we can use our buses differently, instead of driving around in one town, they can come through the towns to go to other locations, which meant that the routes, the time that it would be on a bus didn't change a whole lot, and the need for more buses wasn't there for us either. Most of our ride times are, for our kids, are less than 45 minutes for our elementary, definitely less than 60 minutes for our middle and high school kids. And so we did not see any significant problem with the transportation in this model. The students who lived on the very fringes of our district already have fairly long ride times. Those ride times get a slight bit longer. About 5 minutes is what we saw for most. And so we looked at all that. And we also had an entire task force that looked at pre-K. Our first recommendation was to go to full day pre-K 5 days a week for our students. Financially, that's not possible for us at this time because the state doesn't fund pre-K at a full day time period. But what we did see as we put this budget together and we're able to consolidate some of the positions and some of the work within the 3 schools is that we can expand our pre-K to 5 half days instead of 4. And provide for before and after, or full day care through the Community Connections program. So when we're able to concentrate our staff into a few locations for things like Community Connections, we can offer a little bit more for that. And so those were criteria that we were looking at. We also looked at our educational program, making sure that our systems of supports were stronger, opportunities in the classrooms were there for large enough classes and classes that were configured in ways that we could have different instructional groupings, as much diversity as possible. But we also wanted to make sure that our curriculum was designed for grade levels and specific multi-grade configurations. If you've looked at the configurations of our elementary classrooms over the years, we would have everything from a year where we could do 1st and 2nd grade together, 3rd and 4th, and 5th and 6th. And some years we would have to do 2nd and 3rd grade together or 4th and 5th grade together. What that meant for some kids is that it was a disjointed curriculum because we write our curriculum in our district for straight grade levels, so 1st grade, 2nd grade, and we make modifications to that one based upon 1st and 2nd grade, 3rd and 4th grade, 5th and 6th grade. So we know that we will need multi-age classes at times, but writing a curriculum that can make sure that every kid has the same experience when you don't know which school might have to change to a 2nd and 3rd grade or other kinds of configurations makes it very difficult for that. So consistent class configurations is something that we really wanted to stress as our criteria, and we're able to do that much better when we have the fewer schools and more kids in those classes. And for some of our teachers, it's the opportunity to work in grade-alike teams. In our smallest school, there's 1 teacher for 2 grade levels. And so there is no other colleague that they can work with around instructional strategies, curriculum strategies, any of those things. And so being able to have multiple other teachers teaching at least close to your grade level, maybe it's a 1st and 2nd grade class, it may not always be another 1st grade teacher or 2nd grade teacher, but it gives them some grade-alike teams to work. And so we want to make sure that we did that. And then our special education programming was something else we were very concerned with as well, is making sure that we can provide small group and one-on-one services depending on the needs of the student. In some schools, there's no group work available for some kids because there's no other kid who has either similar need or at the similar need at the similar grade level. And so they end up working one-on-one at times where they might be better served by small group. And so we are able to do more of that, and we can specialize some of our service delivery. If you can imagine, we have one special educator at two of our schools, one each in two of our schools, means they serve kindergarten through 6th grade, all disabilities and all students. If we have a larger school, we could have 2 special educators concentrating a little bit more on specific grade levels or specific student needs. So that just gives a little more specialization. And our specialist support, we have specialists who drive around our district serving student needs, and one of the things that we want to make sure is, can we reduce that? Less time on the road and more time with kids was definitely a thing that we wanted to look at in those special ed services. And we've talked about this, we're not talking about next year moving the 6th grade to the middle school. That will be the following year. And so we wanted to make sure that we were building a strong middle school program. We'll be looking at starting that work with our teachers to be prepared for that, so that they have middle grades endorsement. But that allows our kids greater access to co-curricular activities in the 6th grade. It allows us to more efficient use of space and facilities. If you've been looking at our current budget, we reduced our middle school by an entire core of teachers because of the enrollment at U32, which means that you're going to have a wing in the middle school that does not have any classes in it. So that's 5 classrooms that will not need to be used at U32 next year because we don't have enough middle schoolers. So we're not using our space very efficiently. And we would love to have that more diverse cohort of learners, so a larger 6th grade group. Some of our kids are in very small classes as it is. And this just allows us to create more opportunities for those kids, greater programming, so things like world languages can be started in the 6th grade instead of the 7th grade. And then U32 can serve as both a middle school program and a high school program. And then the final part of this is our community school work that we've been starting. Having 3 elementary community schools and U32 as a community school allows us to work efficiently with those communities. And so we can concentrate some of those resources that we get. We have some grant funding for this, so we can do after-school programming coming up in the next year, 2 years really, for all of that. Being able to concentrate that in a couple of schools means that we can offer a more robust program for all of our kids in after-school programming. And so, so that community school work continues to be an approach that we're using to help bring more to our students outside of the normal school day. And then there's some things that we just want to remind people, if you're watching the news, you're paying attention to the legislature, future budgets may be capped. So you may have heard there is a move out there, there's a Senate bill to cap per pupil increases at 2%. Our per pupil increase this year is a little over 7%. And so a 2% capped increase for us would have been an additional about $1.5 million that we would have had to cut from our budget. So being able to find efficiency anywhere we can find it is helpful. The legislation also calls for small schools, small by necessity, would receive additional funding. None of our schools will qualify under the current definitions of small by necessity that are in draft. And those we've gone through a couple of drafts now. Of that definition, we continue to not be eligible, which means in the future, right now we do receive a slight amount of money more because we are small schools and we're a sparse population. In the future, that funding would not be available to us under the current definition. And then on top of that, our enrollments are projected to continue to decline. We will see a loss of students over the next several years that will contribute to loss in funding as well. So those constraints are certainly something that we need to make sure that we consider. We also need to remember that time is a fixed resource for us. We only get kids for a certain amount of time, and so that does play into what programming we can do. Our space can also change how we organize our school. Staffing can be difficult when we have staff that have to be shared across multiple buildings, or we have to have part-time staff in a single building. And so these are all other constraints that we must look at when we think about all of this. But we do hope, as a result of doing this work, that we can add some programming in. So be able to expand our before and after school care, We've been talking with the Central Vermont Medical Center about potential for health clinics or a health-type clinic. That's part of our community school work. We can use our buildings as community spaces. If you've listened to us, we've said very definitively, we are not going to get rid of any of our school buildings should we decide to close them for the educational uses. We're looking for additional educational uses for these buildings, but we also will maintain them so that they don't become an immediate need for the town to figure out what to do with them. Down the road, that could change, but that's a decision that I think the communities and the board will have together as to what that may look like. No community is forced to buy a building. If we decide as a district that we do not want the building for use anymore, it's offered to the town for $1, and then the town can make the decision on whether or not they wanted to accept that cost. If they do not, then it would be our obligation to sell it in the open market, and there are all kinds of rules about how that happens. And so we still, at this time, do not want to sell these buildings or get rid of the buildings should we decide to close, because we believe that there could be additional educational uses for them, for either special education programming or I hint at it, the Career Center also needs a little bit of space to help with some of their programming, and so we do think that we might be able to help with that. And so those are some of the potentials for our future. And that brings us to our questions, which this allows me to stop talking and you to start asking, which we really appreciate you being here. I'm going to stop the share at this time so those online could raise their hand if they want to ask questions as well.
So please, Gerald has a mic, so if you want to just come to the front or raise your hand, whether it's...
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sure.
Can we just shift it now? So
Yeah, just move it.
they just want to be able to see if anybody's speaking online.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're online and you would like to raise your hand too, if you have any specific questions. Okay, we have.
Hi, my name is Felicia. I'm a parent from Calais. I have quite a few questions, sorry. So how was the configuration committee formed? Who picked those people?
Happy to answer anybody on the board. So the configuration committee, we asked people to send letters of interest to serve on the configuration committee, and then we did the same for staff, and we did the same at the board meeting. People from the board also raised their hands, and we picked from there. We made sure that we did not have a lot, so don't think that there was like a ton of interest. We had very limited interest from all of our communities, so we were able to point basically by town people that were interested. You're sitting next to Anna, who volunteered from Calais, right? Like what we did do is that we decreased the number of board members and increased the number of community members to make sure that it was a community voice on that. So
We also, we also made sure that the principal that was serving on the committee was going to be from one of the affected schools if we were looking at that, because we had already had a proposal around this, so we wanted to make sure that we had principal from the small schools. So we had that, and we also, we wanted the principal from the middle and high school. There's not a whole lot of choice there. There's just one person.
Okay.
I just want to also acknowledge that there was a public comment on Front Porch Forum made that we excluded skeptics from the configuration committee, and I think I take issue with that for a couple reasons. One, 2 members of the committee had, I think, 12 members total. 2 members of the committee ended up voting against the recommendation. An additional 2 members of the committee came in either having been on record voting against last year's recommendation or expressing publicly very grave concerns about last year's recommendation. And a 5th member of the committee was the principal at Roxbury School. She brought that experience to the table in our conversations and understood, the potential for loss of a community resource. So I don't think it's a fair critique to say that we excluded skeptics.
So that being said, did you know where the other committee members were standing? Did you know that they were for the configuration?
That's a good question. So I recall questions having to do with, we had a brief questionnaire, and we asked people to sort of explain how they view the challenges that the configuration committee was facing. We weren't asking for a litmus test response of whether you support or do not. And I also recall that we really focused on people's availability to show up for the meetings and be active participants. And we had one member who stepped away because he felt he couldn't be an active participant through the process.
Were they like open-ended questions, or were the questions pretty direct where the answers would tell you they were for the configuration or not?
I can also weigh in on that as well, because being a person that's from Berlin and knowing a few extended but not, I would say that the questions, and it did not strike me as weighted either way, but it also did not let me know either way unless somebody explicitly said it. And I think at that point, we knew there were enough members on the committee that it wasn't necessarily a red flag to those of us. And I can say that as a person who voted against this configuration. So, the only reason I'm saying that is so that, when I was reading it, I wasn't looking and saying, oh, wait a minute, we're stacking this. I voted, for what the committee ended up being constructed as.
So hypothetically, if this is voted no, not to close our school down, would there be a new configuration committee assembled, or would the same people be on it?
I think that would be up to the board. At that point, the board reorganizes in March, and they would pick up the work, depending on where we land right now. And one thing that I would share with you is that we were very specific of what the charge of the committee was going to be, the timing, the equity imperative. I can go over all of the documents that we sent to them. So when we are looking at who the members of the committee are, or where we're working with the community, it's not about if you're for or not about it, for it, right? We're looking to not divide our work. We're all working on behalf of our kids. So the decisions that we were making to bring people into the configuration committee was to have different perspectives. Has kids in school, doesn't have kids, make sure that everybody has a voice so that we can all work together through our differences, right? Because that's what's gonna do what is best for kids. So I wouldn't, and my hope is that whatever comes next, we would figure it out all together, right? And figure out what do we need to put together in order to move forward the work for our kids. So it was never like trying to look at, oh, he voted no, he should be here. It was more about having a diverse group of people into doing the work for our children.
Okay. I have more questions, but I'll give the mic over to give someone else a chance.
Anybody else that wants, there.
Hi, my name's Catherine Saunders. People otherwise in town know me as Kathy Morse. I've lived here for about 40 years. I've put 7 kids through this school and through U32, and I'm also employed at both Doty and Calais. So this is hard for me as well. I may have missed this, but I was just wondering if we could see all 5 schools' budget, all 5 elementary schools' budgets, rather than just Calais and just Doty. I haven't seen Middlesex, Rumney, I haven't seen East Montpelier or Berlin. And I just want to make sure cuts were made equitably, because we really have a dire-looking budget, and it scares a lot of people.
Yeah, Catherine, thank you. So the budget that we put forth that we called which A or B? 2A, thank you. I'm sorry. 2A was our budget that really showed 5 elementary schools and what the staffing would look like. The cuts are across the board and at U32 as well. In fact, I would just say at U32, 3 elementary schools, 4 elementary schools, 5 elementary schools, the cuts will remain there no matter what. So when we looked at what was the funding available, right, so we base our funding on the number of kids and the needs of those kids in each of the schools. And so when you look at 5 schools, that reduces the funding at 5 schools versus if you have 3 where you can combine those kids up and have more funding because there are more kids in those buildings. So when we distribute to 5 schools, it is cuts are fairly equal. I don't want to say they're equal though, because it's not the same dollar amount, right? It's based upon the number of kids. And what I would say is that when the principals sat down and did that work of what do we need, where do we need it, we tried to maintain substantially similar services across all of them. And a good example of that is the reductions needed to have 5 elementary schools. We could not do band and chorus at all 5 of them. We could only, the dollars would only go long enough to make sure that they all got music, their regular music instruction, but band and chorus couldn't be done. And so we made the decision that band and chorus would not exist at any of our 5 elementary schools if we're in that configuration. If we're combined into 3, we know that we have, the funding is there to be able to do band and chorus. So those are the small changes that we're able to look at. Some schools, and I think nursing is a good example, some schools, the nursing isn't cut back as much because of the needs of the kids in that building. So we do have a school with a student with very high needs, medical needs, so we have to have a full-time school nurse there. We supplement the funding for that school with district funds to cover the costs as opposed to saying that you have to cover it with just the students that are in your building. That would be true no matter the size of the building. So if Callis were to have a student who came here that had high medical needs and we needed a full-time school nurse, we would hold the school harmless for the cost beyond what they had already budgeted for that, and that would come from district funds to be able to do. And so I hope that I will also say that the budget 2A that we put together, we'll still go back and reconsider and really look at our staffing one more time before we say, here's our final staffing scenarios for each of those schools. But the cuts go across all 5 schools. It is not specific to Doty or Callis should they vote to stay open. It is all 5 schools will be affected in some way. Did that fully answer your question?
You have a follow-up? Looks like you're going to follow up with that.
So were the percentages of cuts equal?
No. So they wouldn't be. So the percentages don't equal up when you look at each school because the way the funding is done is it's based upon the number of kids and the needs of those kids. And so there may be a higher need for some kids at one of the schools, so their percentage cut overall might not quite be the same. So I don't want to say that the percentages are equal. So if we said it had to be a 12% cut across, we don't cut 12% at every school in central office. What we do is we look at how do we reduce the overall per pupil by 12%, and then that could look different depending on the school. They're not substantially different. Like one school isn't going to have 50% in cuts and the other one have 1%. But the change in students, so the demographic changes in number of kids is one of the biggest effects that we have. Doty's a very good example of that, is that they have, we budgeted for almost 70 kids this year, but next year they'll have just over 50 kids. That loss in students is loss in funding for that school. And that's different. That's a big percentage of kids. And that percentage of kids lost isn't the same like at Berlin. So Berlin holds it pretty even in their budget from year to year because their number of kids stays fairly even. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question of if one of the towns votes to keep one of the schools open, that's like that you already have the budget somewhat in place for that for next year. But then I'm curious, it sounds to me like there's still going to be a lot of budget issues and that probably there would be another configuration committee still created even if that happens. I guess I'm curious if there's any conversations around like what next after that 1 year. And I'll follow it up with a more detailed question, which is about the moving of the sixth graders to U32. It looks like most of the proposals you gave had that in there. When that decision was made by the board this year, like if one of the schools votes to keep themselves open, is that still, like how much of that decision is already made, or is that still not 100% certain that that's going to change? And I know you might not be able to answer, but I'm just, yeah.
Actually, let me answer. And there were several questions in there, so make sure I hit all of them. I think, let me start with the last one, which is, should one or both schools or communities decide that they do not want to close, we then need to have a conversation about bringing the sixth grade to U32. So the whole package around that was if we consolidate into 3 elementary schools and move the sixth grade. And so I think that we definitely need to step back and look at that decision should the towns vote to keep those schools open. Because there will be some small school, we would be creating a lot of small schools at that point in time, and that may not be financially viable for the elementaries. It could mean that there are drastic cuts at U32, though, in order to do that. As I said, we're going to have a wing of the school that doesn't have kids in it. So lots of decisions to make around that. There's no definitive one at this point in time. We do have to revisit that. Let's see, let me go backwards.
Basically just get the,
The budget, if there's 4 schools or 5 schools. So
not for this year, but for future years, like what's the process?
So we're going, I see us maintaining our budgeting process that we currently have, where we put money towards where kids are and their needs. And so when I know I keep saying that and additional needs, so the state gives additional dollars for students who are free and reduced lunch, currently are in small schools, are in sparse areas, which all of our kids are in a sparse area. There's a tiny bit more money that goes to 6th through 12th grade, so they get a small increase as well. So those additional needs for the students accounts to additional dollars for the school, and that's usually built upon on socioeconomic and community conditions. And so, when we talk about what happens in the future, we are going to continue to see a declining enrollment within our district, according to everything we see. We will still have to make decisions about how we're structuring some of our classes, what programs we're offering from pre-kindergarten all the way through 12th grade, in order to make sure that we maintain the services that we want and the programming that we want, even as we continue to have a decline in our enrollment. So just for this year, our decline in enrollment from in the state formula was a $2.5 million loss of revenue. So the only way that I can say this in a way that might make some sense, because the state formulas are super complicated, it's taken me years to figure these things out. So please know, if you don't understand it, you're not alone. But our budget from this year to next year has a modest increase of 0.1%. Our per pupil goes up 7.2% because the number of kids that we have drops, but the dollars that we spend on them didn't. And then you've all seen your taxes. They're crazy high. But I don't want to dissuade anybody in this, but the taxes increased at a higher rate than our per pupil increased. And that's nothing that we can control. That's the CLA, the Common Level of Appraisal, and the state's formula for how it does that. We don't control any of the tax piece, but we can maintain a level budget. It still per pupil goes up drastically, and then your taxes could increase a lot, even with us spending no more money next year than this year to keep our schools open. This is why Act 73, foundation formula, all these other terms that you're hearing about in the legislature, that is why those things are happening right now as well.
It's basically the same, but so basically my question is kind of like, okay, if the town votes to keep school open this year, what's the likelihood that then there's going to be this same whole conversation again in a year or two because we still need to talk about configuration for financial reasons.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I would add to that is that, like Stephen explained at the beginning, we want to have our programming drive our decision. What do we want as communities for our kids? And we've been working really hard to understand our core values, moved into our strategic plan. And what we've been trying to do now is operationalize that strategic plan in behalf of all of our students, right? So if we, for example, if both communities voted no, this year already, we know that pre-K and K for Doty is happening at Middlesex, right? So as we move ahead, more of that would need to happen in order to meet our student needs. And I think the question right now also is like, why would we be sacrificing if one school, for example, or one town chooses not to close? There's a lot of things built into this 3 multi-town elementary schools that allows us to better serve the kids that we won't be able to do if we keep our 5 elementary schools open right now, right? Like we're working really hard on our multi-layer system of supports that we wouldn't be able to support it at the level that we're doing it right now. So it's back again getting us thinking about all of us as one community for all of our kids.
I think there's more questions out there.
Yeah.
And other board members, feel free.
Yeah, please. Yeah, we just.
Back to Felicia.
Yeah. And anybody in line, please, online.
I'm going back to Catherine's question. Where can we see a line-for-line budget for each school?
So we don't usually publish it as a line by line for every school, but we can. I can get, I don't want to promise something that won't be exactly what you're saying, but we can show a line-by-line budget. If you look now, the budget, and it may in the letter that I put out, has the categories, so instruction, health services, those kinds of things. We can show it school by school as well.
That would be helpful, I think, for transparency.
Okay.
We want all the information because it's a big decision, right?
Yeah.
Does anyone else have a question before I go on?
Felicia, can I just add that
Yes.
one thing that Stephen and our administration has put out is a current staffing chart that shows what the staffing is in each school currently, how the staffing would change to the 5-school configuration, and how the staffing would change to the 3-school configuration. I have it open on my computer. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer specifics.
Sure. Well, maybe if you could make that accessible for everyone to see, I think that would be.
Well, it's online.
Oh,
It's on the website. It's on the website, and it is in several parents'
is that budget on the
too.
website too? Because I don't think I found that either, the line-for-line budget for each school.
No, I don't know that there's a line by each school.
Okay. It'd be helpful to see what schools were over budget and which ones weren't, I think.
So no school is over budget. So the way that this is set is that every school has a budget amount based upon the number of kids. That's the whole thing that I keep saying, right? The kids and their needs. That's as much as the schools are allowed to spend when they're putting their budgets together. So that keeps us from going over budget. We actually didn't meet the board's, one of the board's parameters was to increase the per pupil by no more than 5%. That was something that we kept striving for, and we couldn't do because of some of the needs that we saw in our schools. That's why we're at a 7.2% increase to that per pupil instead of 5%. Because we didn't, if we stuck with what the board asked for, then yes, we are over budget, but it's across the board for us.
And you said that Doty was going down to 50 students. Where did those students go? Did they move out of town, or they're going to high school, or?
So Doty has traditionally had somewhere around 8 to 12 kids per grade level. The incoming grade levels now are 2 to 6. And so it's just over time, we've seen these reductions in the number of kids. And so it's the next kindergarten class is 3 kids and the pre-K is 2. And so we're just seeing a decline in that. We'll see some not as drastic, but East Montpelier is predicted to decline as well. By their birth rates were cut a couple of years ago from 18 kids per year to 12 kids per year. And so we're seeing a demographic change in our district. Our district's older people more than younger people.
Zach, do you want to grab the mic? I just was not sure. Okay. Yes, yes.
This isn't going to be a popular response, but I also feel like we are feeling the evolution of our Act 46 decision, because we're used to our towns giving us our budget, us seeing it, and we knew that U32 was a rolled-up package. So as a combined district now, we're all together. All of our budgets are together. They're all merged. And we have slowly been coming to realize that as we're doing our work, that the detail that might have been there before, because it was our own little school board doing it for our school, put it out there. These are now merged with merged interests, merged strategies, and that. And so to me, to a certain extent, it's my learning curve as well that, whoa, you know, this was one of our worries about Act 46 and that merging. So I do believe, and I just put it out there too, as we watch current changes happening, that we keep in mind our questions, our concerns, and keep putting them forward, because this is, I believe, also the sticker shock of, as a big district, what that looks like and what that cost is, and trying to understand in an overly complicated funding system anyway.
I had another question about the decline in students. There was noted that there was like 9 counselors at U32. I'm just wondering if the staffing is matching the decline as well.
So U32 has 4 school counselors and a director of student services. That's your entire counseling staff there. So, but there was a social worker. That position is being reduced. We're moving to a model where we use outside support. So there are increases to school counselors in a 3-school model. That was a decision that our principals made to add in additional supports for kids. That can be done when we have 3 elementary schools, but if we have to spread that out across 5, we can't. And so what our principals wanted to do was make sure that we were building in functional skills support for our students. These are high-need students. We felt like if we could address those needs early on, and school counselors are some of our best people to do that work, then we could avoid having to take care of those issues as they got to U32. And so that was a conscious decision to up the number of school counselors in those 3 schools in order to provide additional services to kids.
I'll just keep going and no one else has any questions.
Right. Thanks, Felicia.
You can have this back in a minute. Just as this conversation's going, I'm thinking of your question and looking forward, the configuration that you're setting up now with the enrollments declining the way they are up to 2032, do you imagine that this configuration will be viable up until that point or beyond it? Like, how long will this last is my question.
So I will say that there's a certain amount of hope that this configuration can manage that time period. Maybe there's a lot of state policy that's changing that right now as well that may affect us. I know that we're having conversations with other districts as well, and what might that entail? But those other districts are facing declining enrollments too. That's not unusual here. I would say we're hopeful this configuration can carry us through this loss of students. Maybe there's some housing changes that the state comes up with that start to help, that will help flatten our curve. I know that I've heard this when I've been out in the community, is that somebody always knows somebody who just moved into town with kids, right? And that's fantastic. And that doesn't help us increase the number, that helps us flatten the curve. And so that's the hard part, is that yes, we are thankful for every kid and every family who moves into the town, but we need a lot more to get back to where we are. We've been running a system of schools that's based upon an enrollment from 10 years ago. And so making these changes, we're hopeful that this will carry us through this next decline in enrollment. And I think the question about sixth grade and where it's located is a pretty valid question, is really keeping an eye on that over the next year as to what we might do, because if we were to be able to work with another school district, maybe there's talk of regional high schools or things like that, we might be able to slow some of that down and keep our elementary schools just a little more, a few more kids. I don't want to make any promises about how that works because I don't know what's going to happen in the next few months in the legislature, but I mean, I've been watching that House Ed and Senate Ed committees. They're all over the place right now, and so we're waiting to see what they're going to come up with out of that. That will determine a lot.
I think also just looking at the raw numbers, when you look at how many students are in our schools now and what we're, and the projections Stephen cited of another 14% loss in the next couple of years, the combined schools would be larger than what we have now by enough. It would be larger than when you look at those two pairings, it would be larger than the larger of the two schools by enough that if we shaved off if we lost another 14%, we would still be above the point that the larger school is at right now. And we know that functions.
Anybody else before we go back to Felicia? Anybody online? I don't see anybody raising their hand. So Felicia, you got the floor. Wait, when?
My name is Jennifer Chambers, and I'm curious to know more about what you're talking about of the use of the Worcester and the Calais schools with career and special education.
Yeah, thank you. This is the alternative use idea. What can we use our schools for if we don't have our current grade levels and all that? One of the things that we currently have within our special education program is we have kids who are outplaced. So they're sent to independent. There's independent learning facilities. There's different things that they can be part of. These are very high need students. We would love for some of those students to remain in our district and be able to educate them right here. If we could, at either one of these two buildings, start a program like that or have a program like that, it would be beneficial to a very high need group of students who right now don't always get their education within our communities. They may leave. They don't go too far, but there's transportation. There's a reduced access to our community activities, which is where they're growing up. I can cite one of the programs at U32 that we have, one of the pathways for students. They have additional support. They're a little bit separate, but they can also engage in classes or programs at U32 instead of being at an independent location that's not on the campus. And so if we can do some things like that, that would be really nice. For the other one is the Career Center. Most of you know because of the vote not too long ago on the bond for a new career center. They're still looking for space. And so we've had conversations with them about what kind of classroom spaces do you need? What kind of learning spaces might you need for some of your programs? And do we have that? Where might that be? Whether it be here, like a place like Calais or at U32, those conversations have started for us as well. So we're looking at other possibilities. If you remember last year, we looked at partnering with Turtle Island. Those are options that we would continue to pursue because they put programs in our communities for our kids. And so we think that that's important.
Implications as well. How does the money follow those programs? Because there's money that backs both of these things.
So the special education, we already spend that money on those students, so that's already a part of our budget. So that money is spent for those kids to go to some of those independent programs. That would be money that would, instead of going outside to an independent program, it would stay here within the district. We hope that we can do it more efficiently than some of those programs do. And we could also reduce some of our transportation costs, which are pretty high for some of that as well. For something like the Career Center or a Turtle Island or something that's not one of our specific programs, there would be a lease kind of situation. I want to dispel any myths that a lease would be enough to fully fund the operation of a building this size. That's just, unless somebody was leasing the entire facility, if they were only leasing a few classrooms, that would help offset costs, but it would not cover the entire costs of a building. What we have budgeted right now for our buildings, if we do have 3 elementary schools, we are still budgeting custodial support for Callis and Doty campuses so that those can still be maintained, kept, we're going to keep the heat on, all those kinds of things. These are assets that we cannot let go, and we want to make sure that we maintain them for both us as a district and for the town to be able to use. And so we're still committing some resources to that. The hope is that we won't need as much money for electricity and as much money for heating, but we certainly have budgeted to make sure that those buildings are maintained at their current level. And should there be a capital need, so if something were to happen to a boiler or something like that, the district is still committed to making sure that those things are taken care of and it's not put back on the towns at this point in time.
Yeah. Has there been any calculation done in terms of what an alternative program would actually cost if we brought students who are currently going out of the district for special needs services, whether or not we would be able to bring them back in and teach? Because I imagine that would require more staffing than we currently have now, and just because we're not serving those students with our staff right now, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
I mean,
so has there been any concrete analysis done on whether or not that actually would save money, which is the intent here, I imagine?
Yes, so I will say that we do not have a formal budget right now because we don't know what our configuration is. But what we've looked at is who are those students, what are the costs of sending them to the current programs, and what do we think that like the back of the napkin kinds of calculations, we do believe that we can save some money. I will say that when I was at U32 as principal over there, that's when the program that I kind of mentioned started. We saw a pretty significant savings where we had 5 or 6 kids that were in other programs. We were able to serve those 5 or 6 kids with 3 adults, which if they're out in independent programs, each of those 5 kids probably has at least 1 or 2 adults that were a part of their programming. So we were able to save a pretty significant sum when we did that. So we know that we could save some. It is not going to be one of those, we save millions of dollars, right? It's something where we save 100,000 or so, total. So,
Yeah, I just want to point out that the idea of a therapeutic school was not part of this configuration recommendation, and it's an exciting possibility, and we would approach it as a board and as an administration methodically if we pursued it. It's why it's not mentioned in our materials related to this configuration. So again, an exciting possibility, but I think we need to manage expectations around it, and we aren't, to be clear, we aren't promising that as a possibility yet because we're not comfortable doing so. I also wanted to just acknowledge a Front Porch Forum post by a select board member in Callis related to building cost and clarify a couple points that had some accuracy and some inaccuracy in them. One was the cost of upkeep of the building. I think the number 250,000 was cited. It's actually, I think Suzanne said somewhere around 190,000 was my recollection. Callis is a little more expensive than Doty. That includes, as Stephen said, a half-time FTE for custodial. It also, because I was very curious about this, I questioned Suzanne after her public citation of those numbers, and it includes utilities at the current usage rate, which likely would not actually be the case. Likely those utility costs would go down. So 190 is on the high end of that expectation. And I think that's useful information for Callis as a town as it evaluates this as well.
I just wanted to also remind us that as we're making these suggestions, considerations programmatically, that we also apply that to an alternative school. It's not about saving money necessarily. It's about whether or not we're providing the best that we can, or what is needed programmatically for our students who are currently needing to leave the district to do that. So I would just remind us that to do things well doesn't always save us money, and if we're programmatically being, if that's our North Star, then that needs to be our North Star for all students.
Yes.
I'm Linda Gray from Calais. My concerns are about the budget of the central office, and I've made that pretty clear. I think our per pupil amount that we get is 16,000 and something, and about 8,000 of that goes to either central office or central services. My concern is not central services, because I understand a lot of those people deal directly with students, but the central office, and I have the salaries in front of me of $2 million, 20 people in the central office, and most of those don't deal with any of our students. And I think there are other costs in the central office that are not just salaries. Obviously, there are benefits and other kinds of costs, and I've been asking in writing and so on, and I've written a letter and no response. I'd like to know what kinds of cuts you could make in the central office to restore some of the teaching cuts that we've had to look at that are kind of scary. So that's my question. Thank you.
Linda, thank you. So she's correct. It's about $2 million for our central office. The central office consists of the superintendents. So when you look at those lines that are on that sheet, it's the superintendent services, it's the curriculum services, and it's the financial services. And even within that, the curriculum services includes our ELL educator, our multilingual learner educator, and it also includes our instructional coach. We have one instructional coach for the entire district. And so those, we did look at where can we reduce. We have I can tell you, we have in our financial services, we have a business manager, we have an accountant, we have our accounts payable, and we have a payroll clerk. Any one of those positions eliminates the supports for our schools to do that work. So that work then goes to the schools, and we didn't feel like that was the right place to have that kind of work done. When you look at we have an HR director and we have a benefits specialist. We have over 300 employees, and we are currently in negotiations with all of our employees. And so having these positions to both serve our people so that they know what their benefits are, they can get all those kinds of services, that's not an unusual number for an organization that size. So we didn't see a cut there. After that, there's a director of curriculum, there's a data manager, there's myself as the superintendent, which you're required to have, and there are 2 admin assistants. That's our central office. The consolidation to
2-3 schools, what did the staffing go down?
not at a central office. You mean our overall staffing? No, we have almost 318 now. We'll be right around 300 when we with a reconfiguration, and so.
I'm gonna let Zach and Daniel speak. I just want to add that every single position at central office does touch kids. You know, it might feel like the superintendent is just up here, but the superintendent is the instructional leader for the entire district, right? And then sometimes we feel like maybe our HR director is not touching kids, but she is also touching kids because she's making sure we are doing our hiring right, like we are diversifying our educator workforce. So every single one of those is not just an adult isolated from kids. They are directly impacting student outcomes. Go ahead, Daniel.
Can I just say, just to finish up, if you don't mind? So we did have a contract that was through central office with our equity scholar in residence. That one was eliminated, so that was over $100,000 contract. So that was a place where we felt like that work could go to our director of curriculum and instruction and assessment and start doing that. But we do feel like the work that we have a very lean central office. It's only 4.5% of the entire budget. That's small for Vermont. Vermont's usually around 6%. And so we've tried to streamline as much as we feel like we can and still provide the services to our employees and to our kids that we need to do.
Yeah, a couple of things I wanted to add. The list that Linda cited also includes all the information technology folks. So that's actually 4 out of those 20 positions cited are in IT.
5.
Or 5, sorry, I misread the list. So that's that's actually a pretty significant burden on the schools that is not something that is, if you look back, 20, 30 years, you probably would have been that level of funding. I think the other question is like, how do we scale central office down? When you look at the state proposals to merge districts, that's really where that's coming from. If we merge with Montpelier, we will still only have 1 superintendent. We'll probably only have 1 director of curriculum, 1 director of special services. That's where you change that. You don't. This is something that doesn't change a whole lot with the number of students in the district. It's a pretty fixed cost that changes with the number of districts. And so that's why there's so much talk about consolidating at that level, and why we're thinking about sort of how do we position ourselves to be able to do that.
Just to follow up on that, that is always the hope, but that was the hope for Act 46 as well, to have a consolidation and merging the administrative, and it would be reduced, but that didn't happen. And pretty soon after Act 46 went into effect, the proponents were backtracking, saying, well, it really wasn't about saving money. It was trying to improve student quality of programming. The other thing is the services cost money. I mean, that's just the fact. And if we want to reduce services, that's where the budget comes down. But the community has to be willing to work with the board on what they want to reduce, because that's, personnel is like 75 to 80% of what our budgets are. It's not buildings, it's personnel, and personnel, presents the programs, teaches our students, cleans their schools, does a lot of other things. So it's just a tough conversation to have, because we don't have the economies of scale, really, even if we combine, because we still have the same number of students. We're not getting rid of students, and that's really where a lot of our resources go toward.
Yeah, I wanted to just emphasize a couple points. One was, and I want to acknowledge Linda, because you have brought this up multiple times, and so I'm sorry we haven't gotten you a substantive answer sooner. But 3 points. One is, I think you'll find a lot of folks up here who are ambivalent about Act 46. I think one of the reasons it didn't save our district money is because we were already sharing a lot of those administrative services in our central office as a supervisory union. And so you didn't see savings as you consolidated. To be clear, that type of consolidation was very different from the type we're talking about now. Another point is that I took a look at central offices at the Harwood School District and also at the Montpelier Roxbury School District. It's a little hard to compare because job descriptions and roles are merged in different ways in each district. But all 3 of those districts, us and those 2 adjacent districts, we all land in about the same range of 18 to 20 professionals. I think it's very hard to do what the central office does in Vermont with fewer. And third, I want to point out, just to emphasize that last point, this board had a very hard conversation in September of 2023, where after the budget for the year was set, the previous superintendent, Megan Roy, came to us asking to add an HR director, and we grilled her about why we were doing that in the middle of a budget. And the reality was that at the time, I think this is still a dynamic. It's less acute than it was then, but we were having a lot of trouble filling open positions. We were closing the school because we didn't have adequate substitutes. It was a hard situation, and that was the last time I think we added a new full-time position. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's the case. And we've tried getting by without an IT director in quite recent memory, and it didn't work well. There were lapses, there were public criticisms about our board meetings and access issues, and so we reinstated that position. So I do think that we make every effort to scrutinize the central office budget and scrutinize the way we spend money administratively, and I think it's defensible.
Any other questions? Wait, where Jessica?
Hi, I'm Ashley. I'm a parent in Calais, and I'm also an OT in this district. And I just had a simple question. I was just wondering what the projected class sizes are after the consolidation versus now. And maybe you already covered that in the beginning, but I missed the beginning.
No, thanks. That question has not come up. So our class sizes right now range from 7 kids in one of our kindergarten classes up to 23 at or 4. I'd have to double check right now in one of our elementary classes. When we're in the reconfiguration, almost every one of our classes falls within our class size requirements that we've set as a board. There are a couple of classes that are 1 student shy of that, which is around 14 to 15 kids. But we also expect that there can be a few kids that come in during that time. None of our classes are over the class limit size that we've set as a district. Right now, we're kind of all over the place with that. It can change from year to year, depending upon which configuration. So the 2 examples I gave you of lowest and highest, those are actually the same grade level. So with a reconfiguration, we can level those out so that they're in the 15 to 20 range for a lot of our classes, but we'll have several classes that are in the 20 to 23 range in the upper grades. We don't want that in the lower grades. So that's definitely there. I will also say that at U32, one of the reasons that we've reduced by an entire core there is because the class sizes in the middle school were reaching about 13 kids per class, and that's too low. And so by reducing that core, it moves the middle school class sizes back up around 20 to 22 kids per class, which is what we want it to be.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Jessica McLeod. I am a Calais resident, and I'm also a parent to a 5th grader. Thank you all for hosting these many sessions. I appreciate your time, and I really appreciate the community members as well. I've attended several of these intermittently, and I'm a nightly reader of Front Porch Forum. This has been, I think, really challenging for a lot of us. My question as a parent to a 5th grader is around the nuts and bolts over these upcoming months. Can you just walk us through, many people have voted, I have not, I'm waiting until Tuesday. Can you just walk us through what happens after February 10th and those next steps, whether there's reconfiguration consolidation or not? And I know the not could be many different, but I need to prepare myself, my child. I have a big investment in the community of Calais, which I care about deeply. So I'm just trying to be very thoughtful about this, and I need to strategize also for the nuts and bolts of these upcoming months.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I think the one thing, no matter configuration, one of the most important things that we're going to have to do in the next month and a half, is making sure that we set our staffing. Right, so that is going to be one of the most important things we do across the elementary schools, is to make sure that we're very clear on who our staff, who are our staff, and where are they going to be. So that's going to be one of the most important things. If there is a vote to close either of the 2 schools, we've also asked the board to allocate some funds. They haven't allocated them yet, but we're going to ask the board to allocate some funds for a transition coordinator, someone that can spend. We see it as a part-time position, not a full-time position, and also to help us transition from now until well into the next school year, so that we can have those events that need to occur, because there's a lot of little things that need to happen should we choose to close a school. There's just the logistics of having people meet, kids meet, have our staffs come together, those kinds of things that need to occur. But there's also, if one of the towns chooses to close their school, there's also a need to celebrate what that school has been and what the new school community will be. And so those are two different things, and we need somebody that keeps an eye on that. And so we've got the job description, we're waiting to see the vote, and then we want to put that person in place. It'll be working in conjunction with some of our community school work, because that work has already kind of started, where we're trying to bring communities together. So that we saw a lot back when we could get outside and have some celebrations earlier in the year, but that work is still coming back as well, and we want to give some additional support to that. I think there's
I predict that there's going to be an almost immediate need for several parents to have a resource almost immediately if there's going to be consolidation. I will be one of those. So it's so as soon as possible for the children and for the parents, can we have a resource where we can funnel feedback or questions?
So not that I want
real time.
not that I want to pile more on my principals, but our principals are definitely going to be front line on a lot of that work. As you can see, as he runs around the microphone for this.
Yeah, I'm out. I mean, yeah. I'm done.
Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to remind us one thing. After February 10th, we still have our budget vote, right? So it's just not in me. So we're working with two, and it's going to be the same budget. It just go spread thinner, depending if it's 4 schools, 5 schools, or 3 multi-town schools, right? So immediately, because I don't want to give the illusion that there's no other thing. So we would continue to have. We would have informational meeting for the budget, but that is the next, which we would still need the community, right? We still need a budget to operate, and once we know what budget we're operating with, which would be the same, basically, because we are just warning one budget, if the budget failed, that would also send us in a different spiral, right? So just didn't want to forget that. Go ahead.
So I missed your name. Jessica, do you have a specific type of information in mind when you're asking for a resource, or what, or would it be helpful for parents to be able to send in questions? Because to say have a resource available and not really know what the content of that might need to be, we may not be able to.
It's a space for my voice to be heard.
Oh,
That's it.
okay.
It's anxiety, right?
Yeah,
So
okay.
it's like, it's just that.
Okay.
It's just that, yeah.
So
And
maybe the whammy
I
bar.
can just say that too, as a school, the staff, like, this is what we've talked about for a couple weeks now. And like, we're taking staff meetings next week, and that's what we're doing. Like, we've talked a lot about this, and there's a lot of anxiety among them too about how we talk about it and what's the best way to do that. And so we're doing that as a staff too. So some of that work will just be us, and some of that work will be in conjunction with the district as how we just go forward.
I just wanted to add, we had some young participants at our Worcester informational session who asked us some very specific questions around what this was going to look like, and that was very welcome input and inquiry. One thing we talked about was the importance of having familiar faces in the new schools, and I don't think anyone's going to lose sight of that, and talk about exactly sort of what that looks like, and preparing people, little and small, little and large, for what the future is going to look like well beforehand. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I would say too that while our front people will be the principals, it's critical for the board to be engaged in that conversation as well, just so that we understand. So when we get our leadership reports within our packets, to me, it would be really important for us to also be hearing what those dialogues are, what the rising questions are, what the rising worries are as we move forward as well.
No, I appreciate that. I almost completely forgot. We also had determined that we would have a transition committee, a small group of people, but that included a couple of parents, a couple of kids, a couple of staff members, and a couple of members from our configuration committee, so that they can kind of just, more of a steering group as opposed to they're going to have to do all the work, but just to keep an eye on things and to just offer feedback. So as you're saying this, I'm thinking, I need to get like that survey out there that people know to go to and all those kinds of things. I appreciate that.
We have about 6 minutes, and go ahead.
I just want to know what kind of research was done by the board and the configuration committee about what happens to a community when the schools close. We've seen this in Roxbury, and it hasn't gone so well. And a lot of the research supports that it's not the best thing to do.
Do you want to go, Ursula? And then
These were not conversations that we necessarily had as a full board, but I know all of us received emails with research from community members, various papers and research papers and links to places to look at things. I personally, I don't know what that was.
We're good.
Just threw me off a minute. I read every one of those. I followed every link. I went so far as to read those research papers and the sources that they cited to take a deep, in-depth look. It's really hard because there are a large number of factors that impact what happens in a community. It isn't always just schools. It's, do you have a post office? Do you have a market? Do you have a restaurant? 110 things that communities could have that they provide for their community members. And I know Calais has a really thriving community. You guys have potlucks, you have different villages, but you guys come together and do these community events. And I know Daniel talked to the students asking about familiar faces, but I know our Worcester students who came asked also about celebrations that happen at the school and traditions. And we have talked a few times about making sure that those transitions, when we bring the two schools together and create a new one, that those transitions come together too, and that they maintain traditions from both schools. And I think Stephen said it at one of the meetings, some of the schools probably do similar things, and you might not know it yet, but being able to bring those traditions together and expand that community and those traditions and keeping them.
Can I add something?
Yeah,
I'd also just like to add that there's been a lot of research on the other side of that topic, which is that if you do not have a strong school, a quality school, people don't want to move to your community. They're going to come and they're going to look and say, do we have a school or do we have a quality school? And I think that that is a really strong thing to highlight as we're talking about building potentially a really strong community school that serves not just Calais, but a wider berth of community. And I would actually argue that that might make Central Vermont stronger as a bigger community even beyond that.
Yeah.
Speak for myself. For Calais, because it's an amazing school. My husband grew up here. We could have gone anywhere. We were thinking about Germany, but we came to Calais for the school, and we stayed even after he wanted to move 2 years ago, because my son is thriving here. Pre-K teacher is amazing, and I can speak for myself when I say I'm here because of the school.
Yeah. Can I, here's one thing that I think I did not say well, and I'll make sure that others have time to comment, is that this is not about any of our schools being poor performers or bad schools. I want to make sure, I did not say that earlier here. I said it at the other informational meeting, is that this has nothing to do with the quality of the schools that we have. That's the one thing that we're blessed by in this district, is that all 5 of our schools are good schools. What we're hoping to do is maintain that level by doing this. And I don't want anybody to ever walk away from any of these thinking that Calais wasn't a good school, Doty wasn't a good school, that any of our elementary schools aren't good schools, because that's the one thing we're blessed with, so that we know that if we have to combine, if that's what the choice is by the communities, we know that we're combining 2 good schools. And so that's something that I really want to make sure that I say and is said, because I completely agree with you. This is a wonderful school. That's not why we're having this conversation.
I just want to add one thing, and it's kind of a follow-up on what Daniel was saying, and then I'll let you do a question. Is it just the voice of our students, because it was just so powerful at our other meeting, and for them to have a mindset that is not a scarcity mindset. She said, Dodie has served me well. I'm paraphrasing what she said, has served me well, and I say thank you to Dodie, and I look forward to meeting my friends in Romney. They are already doing sports and stuff together, and that is like having a young child have the ability to see the future together was really moving. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Mary Rogstad, and going to speaking of the Worcester kids, I just wonder if anyone has spoken to the Calais students and asked, are they in favor of this or are they not in favor of this? I'm just curious.
Do you want the mic, Jessica?
While you're getting the mic, though, I would say that I believe it was a Calais student and a friend who spoke at our January meeting, and she was in tears and brought many of us to tears. And so, there's eloquence on both sides, and we're hearing the value of what our young people are bringing.
Yeah, that was the December meeting, and just in brief, because I know we're short on time, Samantha Jackson's 5th grade classroom has been actively debating this, and the children, the youth have been talking about it. They've involved Principal Weiss, my daughter, as a family. It's entered all the realms. How could it not? But it is happening in the schools. They are talking about it. They are engaging with it, and it's very active. There's the whole gamut, as you might imagine. I don't want to speak for the kids. I can tell you Hazel, my daughter, strongly feels that why doesn't she get a vote? I'm the student. And it's too late for us to set up student elections at the voting box, but you know Hazel.
I know.
So I can tell you there's been conflict. This is per Hazel again. But it's been debate conflict. It's been engagement. And actually, as iterative information has unfolded, some children have changed their decision. So it's being, yeah.
Hi, I'm Allie. I'm a Calais mom. My question is just basically about the timing of all of this. We know that the state is going to be having some big major changes coming up, and we obviously don't know what that is quite yet. So my question is, why are we moving forward with this right now when we know there's going to be more disruptions? Why wouldn't we just wait and find out what the state's going to be requiring before we make some big changes?
I got to say that what we have been trying, and I know that we sometimes feel like we're communicating and there's no way of over-communicating, and we fail all the time, and I want to say that because we've been saying that what we worked on was in creating our core beliefs as a whole community, our 5 towns, then moving into creating a strategic plan all together, having a strategic plan committee similar to the Configuration Committee, and then deciding what we wanted for our kids. So it's not because Act 73, it's because we knew that we needed to get our own system into a place of quality, equity, and sustainability. So our hope is to, with this, bring us to a place that we're sustainable so we can start talking and dreaming together about what's next, what do we want for our kids, and not be in this constant, like, okay, now the configuration of classes has to be this because we have to serve, and it's not necessarily serving best our students, but that's what we have to deal on, because we are talking about, we haven't addressed the declining enrollment for years, and this allowed us to look at our system as a whole, and every time that we do budgeting as a board too, it's about, we put our money where our values are, and what we want is for kids to have what they need, meet their needs, and and give them the opportunities that they deserve. So it's not about Act 73. And if whatever happens with that 73, which a lot of us are really involved in that conversation right now, it is going to be at least 2 to 3 years or even more before we know exactly. And in the meantime, our kids don't have a year to lose, right? So our obligation is for the now, for our kids. And if we come to this semi-stable position, right, at a sustainable place, we would be stronger to have those conversations with anybody else because we would have a foundation of where to have them. I don't know if somebody said. Ursula?
Yeah, Flora said, you ended up saying a bunch of what I was going to say. I mean, I think there's an element where if Act 73 falls apart, this is what makes sense to operate our district as it is now. If we look at how Act 73 is being proposed, we are looking at a per student foundation formula where there is still going to be a very strong per student basis where whatever district is will have to deal with the exact same enrollment challenges we are dealing with. And so it looks, I don't know what's going to happen in the legislature, but what they're talking about looks like it's presenting the exact same issues. The other thing is that, and this is, I'm going to steal something from, that Anna had made a public comment about a couple of board meetings ago, is that, students live, 1 year at a time. We're talking about a lot of time for us students. If I have something that gets delayed a year, that's a little bit less than 2.5% of my life. For my son, if something gets delayed a year, that's over 10% of his life. For my daughter, it's closing on 15. So it's like when we're talking about our young students, we're talking about very, even though for us it may feel like, oh, what's another year? For them, another year is a lot. And so I think that's when we look at this and say, can we move to something that will deliver a better education? We're looking at students who don't, who only have so many years, and it's a lot of their years that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I'm kind of on the same note. My concern is that because the students, like I have a kindergartner, and so my concern is that we're going to do this big disruption. We're going to merge the schools, and then in a year or two, there's going to be another big disruption. And for somebody at this sort of younger state, a kindergartner coming in and having multiple disruptions in the early years, that's just what I'm kind of worried about.
So I think I'm going to talk to if Act 73 moves forward as it's currently proposed, because we can't guess what they might change. It's going to take time. They're talking about merging districts, which is essentially what we did with Act 46, and it took us 2 years to get through the getting a new board together and all of the articles of agreement and all of those things. So that's a 2-year minimum right there. And then I would say by the time we really got going with like combining policies, which we're still addressing some of those old ones, 5 years. 5 years down the road. So think about your kindergartner now being in 4th grade, and we haven't addressed the issue of how do we spread the very little money and the money that keeps declining best to meet our students' needs. If we don't address it now, that quality of education for 5 years gets a little less each year, and what we can provide our students gets a little less, and that's 5 years of impact for your student. There would have to be a lot of work to look at how do you combine elementary schools and very small children any further than what we're talking about today without adding large amounts of bus rides. I think a lot of what's being talked about at the legislature is making regional high schools, so our older students. So your student would probably feel it around 6th grade. Okay. And so that's what I want people to understand is like Act 73 is like a long-term thing. I don't see us, we make this consolidation now, which sets our students up for continuing excellence education. We aren't looking at a change 2 years from now from Act 73, not to their school.
We are at 3:38. Unless there's more questions, we can all go enjoy the rest of your Saturday. But if you want to be here and have more questions, please, by all means. I don't see any hands on the Zoom either. Okay, we just really want to thank you for being here, spending your Saturday with us. If you have any other questions, please do not hesitate to email us, to call us. We want to make sure that you're informed when you vote.
And a big shout out to Danielle and to Jared for getting this all set up for us. We appreciate it.
And Chris too, and Finn, thank you for being here. Thank you.